Hello and welcome to the GI Huddle. For today's episode, I'm joined by Marc Wood, Sales and Marketing Director for 1account, the provider of age and identity verification solutions. Hi Marc, thanks for joining us.
Hi Tim, good to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. We're here to talk about player verification, and for my first question, we understand you've issued a challenge to operators. Can you tell us a bit about this challenge?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the idea behind this is to prove that by using our sort of one account ID verification proposition, we can basically improve the player take on and therefore increase revenues for gaming operators by somewhere between 5 to 10% at no cost, which sounded like, and I think it's a pretty good challenge, right? I mean, why not?
Yeah, for sure. It's very interesting, and we hope they rise to that challenge. Something I'm sure which kind of inspired this, it's something you guys at 1account have spoken about before, is operators not kind of fully optimizing verification processes and then consequently losing revenue because of it. Can you kind of explain this to us in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, sure. So, gaming operators have been using identity verification systems for years now. I mean, it's nothing new. But the existing traditional identity verification solutions in the gaming sector have what's referred to as a success rate, i.e. the number of people that you can actually successfully identify. So if you get 100 people, how many of that 100 people will you actually be able to find successfully verified and then bring them on board as players? And that success rate has more or less leveled out around about 85 to 90%. So if you get 100 people coming to your site that you paid lots of money to try and drive them there, they want to set up an account, and you can normally get about 85 to 90% success rate these days. And it's kind of become accepted as the norm, if you like. But if you think about the maths, the 85 to 90%, that means that you're leaving on the table somewhere between either 15% or 10% of the new players that come to your site that want to set up a new account that you're actually leaving on the table. Leaving on the table means no revenue, no deposits. And it's also fair to say that this whole sort of ratio business, it will never be 100% because obviously there are bad actors out there in the world today. And you've got to try and find them, but the number of bad actors out there is actually relatively small. So if you think about it, if you can try and work on getting an additional 5 to 10% more players on board, and you can prove it, it's a bit of a no-brainer proposition, really, in terms of being able to sort of drive your business at minimal effort and no cost. If that kind of answers your question properly.
Yeah, sure. It does. And obviously 1account and kind of the software you provide aims to help operators do this. And that's kind of what your challenge is about. How does 1account kind of go about doing this? Or what are your kind of aims with your products?
Okay, well, what's different here is that underlying all online real-time age verification solutions is a whole bunch of third-party data sources that you have to bring together to be able to check in the UK, the electoral roll, check with credit reference agencies, check with all sorts of various different databases, if you like, bring them together so you can actually say, yep, this is definitely Marc Wood, he's definitely who he says he is, and that's the model. However, what's happened recently and what we've done is to bring to bear some additional third-party databases that so far other people haven't brought into the equation. And two examples would be the mobile network operator, for example. So probably 95% of the people over the age of 18 have got a mobile phone. And having access to that data set is a very, very powerful addition to the existing data sets. And also another example that we would have is something called a citizen card, which is a database of younger people in the sort of demographic of sort of 18 to 25 that they use for identification purposes. You know, can we get into the nightclub? Can we buy this alcohol or whatever? And we've got access to that as well. So really it's about providing greater data depth, if you like, to bring into the equation of how you can identify somebody online.
Yeah, so I can see the thinking behind covering kind of all the bases, or certainly more bases. Kind of on that point, generally, in recent years, there's been kind of an increase in regulation across the board for gaming firms, but certainly in this area, and kind of you've got age verification and identity verification, sorry. How has this kind of affected operators in recent times?
Yeah, I think the regulatory environment is an interesting one. I mean, I think most of this has been driven by the UK and the UK Gaming Commission, who are probably leading the charge, if that's the right word, in terms of ever-increasing regulatory requirements on the gaming sector. And verification now has got a very different meaning now, because years ago, checking somebody was over the age of 18 was kind of all right, but then that moved into real, more robust identity verification requirements. But now, with increased emphasis on being able to identify problem gamblers, compliance with anti-money laundering regulations, so that the whole term verification has got way broader, and from a gaming operator's perspective, a lot more complicated now. And you know, looking down the road, and I think the operators just expect that to continue, and the same requirements will start rolling out, I'm sure, into other jurisdictions within regulated markets. So it's kind of like you can see that train and that coming down the tunnel at you, and it's not going to stop.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it might be a difficult question to answer, but do you think all of these kind of regulations and everything that they cover, do you think it's fair the way they've been imposed on operators by the Gambling Commission and others that you've mentioned?
I mean, I think the overall intent is fair. I think that what's maybe been slightly unfair is that some of the requirements are actually quite difficult to do. I mean, for example, in the area of problem gambling, if you take that as an example, you know, the ability for a gambling operator to be able to assess whether or not I am in a financial position to be able to spend £50 a week on gambling or not is a very difficult thing to do. It's kind of got a bit easier recently, as there are now some, again, data sources that are out there that can help you kind of assess someone's, not creditworthiness, but someone's affordability, if you like, when you first set up an account. Because normally, if you go and set up a new gambling account, all they know is your name, your address, your email address, and your phone number, and date of birth. And so there's no view there until you're into the system and you're starting spending. You know, what kind of gambler do you really are? Are you really just spending 10 quid on the national lottery once a year? Or are you up playing poker all night, spending £500 a night or whatever? So the answer to your question is, I think the intent is fair, but what's not fair on the operators is that some of the requirements have been very difficult to do. It is getting easier with some of the likes of the propositions that we have within 1account to be able to help that. But sometimes technically, you know, you can understand what the regulators want you to do, but how the hell do you do it? It does get even more complex when you start moving outside of the UK and into other parts of the world as well, where the UK is quite a sophisticated marketplace with lots of different data sources you can get access to, but you start going into other countries and they don't necessarily exist there. So the gaming operators have a real challenge in being able to meet what the regulators want technically. I don't think any of them disagree with the overall intent.
For sure. Bearing in mind that difficulty that you've just described, in your view, how have operators kind of to date responded to the increased demands?
Well, I think there's one of acceptance, that, yeah, this is something we've got to do if we want to keep our gambling license, then we have to do this. I mean, witness, the reason for having to do it is, you remember the fines over the last few years that have been issued out by the regulator, 4, 5, 6, 10 million pounds. That's not an insignificant amount of money. So there's a large incentive here to make sure that the gaming operators do this. I think I mentioned before that there's a recognition that this is business as usual. I mean, compliance and regulatory effort that has to go on inside of a gaming operator these days is massive. Probably a huge amount of cost and expense that's going into being able to cope with this. But they have done it. I think that the gaming operators have found it quite frustrating, again, with the degree of effort that needs to go into purely on a software integration front, to say, okay, if we want to go and check this, that, and the other information about consumers in XY country, that has to go on the development queue. And most gaming operators would prefer to be deploying new game content rather than integrating into some back-end compliance type identity solution. So, and last count, there's probably over 100 different third-party data sources that are out there that you could use as part of this overall conundrum of how do you check someone's identity and verify who they are. And so clearly no one wants to start integrating into 100 different data sources to try and do this. So I think the operators have responded well, they've accepted it, they've spent the money putting in place the people. They don't like the degree of difficulty of integrating with new systems that actually really don't generate them any revenue. But it kind of is what it is.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, from what you're saying, the $1 million question, and particularly in the area of gaming, is how do you ensure verification is kind of at its most optimum, while at the same time sort of not turning players off by, because you mentioned obviously back-end solutions. There's obviously still front end of contacting players and asking them questions. So how do you achieve that balance of not turning a player away who thinks maybe I'll bet with someone else because they're asking me too many questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, at the end of the day, this is all about how do you create the lowest customer friction in terms of being able to either set up an account or place a bet. Historically, there have been gaming operators that have said, send us a copy of your passport or a utility bill or something. Clearly, that's a killer, right? Someone having to do that as part of this verification process. Similarly, there's a lot of solutions that are out there, which is using sort of facial recognition type solutions where, you hold your iPhone up and take a selfie and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know if you've ever tried it, but that's not exactly a rapid, easy process either. So in order to be able to create the least amount of friction, you have to be able to do this online, real time, and kind of in the background, so that the consumer, although they understand that their age will be verified, their identity will be verified, they don't have to actually suffer any pain through going through the process. So if a gaming operator needs your name and address and phone number and date of birth to set up a gaming account, which is fair enough, right? Then you don't want to have to do that twice. So the real trick here is to create a set of technical solutions that seamlessly integrate into this and don't worsen the consumer experience when you're trying to set up a new account. And funnily enough, I mean, that's what we're trying to do coming down the road, is that it's all about clicks. How many clicks do you have to do to be able to get through? And we're on a mission to try and reduce that down to one. So
Yeah,
Just get the rest for us.
yeah. I mean, the number one makes sense because I mean I've heard people in the past talk about 2 clicks is you'd think it's okay, but really in the modern world when there's so many options, 2 is one too many. So I think one is that optimum number. In terms of 1account, what you guys do, I mean, we've talked a lot about your work with operators. I understand you work with affiliates as well. Can you tell us about your work here, and is that kind of the same things, or does that differ somewhat?
No, it is exactly the same. I mean, and the reason that we're working with the affiliates within the gaming sector is that last year, and again, this is a regulatory issue. Last year, the UK GC brought in some new regulations. They actually brought it in to apply to the gaming operators, not to affiliates. But the regulation that they put in place for the gaming operators was they put the onus on the gaming operators to ensure that anybody in their food chain was actually doing the right thing. And obviously affiliates are providing traffic to gaming operators, so they're most definitely in the food chain. And the specific requirement was that for play for free casino games, you have to be able to validate, in the UK at the moment, you have to be able to validate that someone's over the age of 18 before they can even play a play for free slot game, for example. Now, what that did to affiliates that were serving the UK market was that all of a sudden their business model changed, in that if you actually have to go out and start to pay somebody to go and check that somebody is of the right age before they can play a play for free game, that could end up wrecking your affiliate business model for the UK marketplace. I mean, and the context of this is, depending upon how many checks you do, it could be 30 pence a check or 75 pence a check. So if you can imagine an affiliate that's got tens of thousands of people going to their sites, and every time that somebody wants to go and play for free on a slot game, they have to pay out 50 pence. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. So the net result of that was a lot of the major affiliates pulled out of the UK market because it just didn't make commercial sense. So when we launched 1account and looking at this marketplace, we've created a business model that enables us to provide that age verification, are you over the age of 18, solution to affiliates at no cost for them. So it enables the affiliates to be compliant and the operators that they serve be compliant with the gaming regulations, whilst not messing up their business model, and enable their businesses to continue and develop the UK market. So really what we've done here is to open back up for affiliates the UK market, which was previously shut down because it didn't make commercial sense.
Mm-hmm. No, sure, that certainly makes sense. And we've spoken a lot about operators, about verification and their affiliates. My final question for you, Marc, is based kind of on everything we've discussed. What kind of trends do you see in this field in 2021, and specifically kind of what are 1account's aims for the upcoming year?
Okay, so I think that for the upcoming year, coping with and expecting more regulatory requirements. I mean, there's a review underway at the moment by the UK's GC, and God knows where they land. But the focus on being more and more understanding of, if you take my loosest term of verification, which includes problem gambling, that will definitely not go away. And having more and more insight into that whole space in terms of affordability and dealing with problem gambling is going to get, I was going to say going to get worse, it's going to get more intense, let's put it that way. I think that, I mean, what we're planning to do in relation to that is that back on the friction front, to deploy a one-click your verified solution. In context, it's a bit like signing with Google Pay or signing with Facebook kind of model. we're also planning to be able to create an ID that is, there's a new word buzzing around, which is, if you want me to spell it, I can. It's called phygital. Right? So if on your phone you actually have your ID, but it works within an online world and within the offline world. So for people going into betting shops, for example, which currently there's virtually no way of deciding whether someone's over the age of 18 and entitled to bet, other than just looking at them. It's to be able to use that ID within a physical world. So you don't have to go through, from a consumer's perspective, you don't have to go through the pain of any other kind of verification if you're in the betting shop versus when you're online. So you could either get yourself verified online, it's on your phone, you can go into the betting shop and use the same ID within that. So that's coming down the road for us in this year. And lastly, we have created a payment solution which is specifically designed for regulated or high-risk markets. So we don't just operate within the gaming sector, we operate in other sectors such as vaping, for example, which again is not as regulated as the gaming market, but the regulatory requirements are that you must validate that somebody's over the age of 18 to go and buy vaping products, for example. So, and there's never really been a payment solution that caters for those kind of sectors where you need to have that additional knowledge and additional security, both from a retailer or a gaming operator's perspective, that somebody is doing the right thing here, and the consumer proposition as well, just to make it simpler for consumers that want to gamble or want to buy vaping products, to make that as easy as possible for them. And there's a lot of, within the payment space, there's a lot of rationale for that, because the likes of Visa or MasterCard or PayPal, they tend to blow hot and cold on the gaming industry, especially. And again, causes big headaches for gaming operators in terms of trying to stay on top of that. So if we get through all that next year, then that'll probably be a job done, I guess.
Yeah, it sounds like it'll be a busy year for this topic and this area. So I think it's fair to say watch this space. But Marc, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for your time.
Pleasure.
To our viewers, thanks for joining us, and be sure to catch more from affiliates and operators in the January edition of Trafficology, where affiliates and consultants will be giving us their predictions for 2021. Until next time.